So as I was just saying, it's great to see so many of you here online as well. And no wonder, because we have a real big star in the world of human evolution here today. We're really honored, Philip Nix and myself, the organizers of the series. We're really honored to welcome today Maria Martinon-Torres, who needs no introduction, but of course you can't just say she needs no introduction and then just go sit down, right? You have to say something. So I will say that Maria is currently the director of CENIA, I won't say it in Spanish, I'll just say the National Center for Research into Human Evolution at Burgos in Spain. And she runs a large institute, of state-of-the-art institute of lots of laboratories and scientists, numbering around 60 people. And this is a fantastic position in Spanish human evolution and archaeology. Maria studied in Madrid, forensic anthropology at the Autonomous University of Madrid, and then subsequently at Bristol University. She did her PhD in the University of Santiago de Compostela, where she was in the medicine and surgery area, but studying hominin teeth under Bermudez de Castro's supervision. And then since 1998, she's been a member of the Atapuerca team, which, as you're going to hear about, I'm sure, in a second, one of the most significant fossil sites in the world. She spent 2 years away from Spain in 2015 to 17 at UCL before returning to her current post. And Maria has worked on a range of incredible sites in archaeology in China, in Georgia, in the Near East, and of course, in her native Spain. So it's with great pleasure that we welcome Maria here today. Have a great listen, have a great talk, and then we'll have some questions at the end, both online and from the audience. Thank you so much for coming, Maria. Over to you.
Okay. So thank you very much, Tom, and thank you also, Katarina, for this invitation. I was really looking forward to be here in person to get to know your amazing brand new labs and all the amazing projects you have. So I'm so happy that finally I made it to come here. And yeah, today I would like to talk to you a bit about an overview of the Atapuerca sites, which I work in for many years now. And I was putting the emphasis in the title like an East Side story, mostly with the idea of that, well, I don't know how to, So that despite the Atapuerca sites are located in the westernmost part of Eurasia, they indeed have a lot to provide information, very important for the big picture. That's what I say, that it is not just a West Side story, because as you know, it provides information, paleontological, archaeological, molecular, that is really crucial to understand the big evolutionary picture of the evolution of the first hominins until the appearance of Neanderthals and even Homo sapiens. So the Atapuerca sites, they're very rich. I would say that they occupy a very prominent place in the studies of human evolution and the Pleistocene in Eurasia. But I would also like to highlight that all these years of amazing discoveries are coming through because there is like more than 40 years of uninterrupted teamwork there. For me, Atapuerca is like an open-air university. I feel like I'm daughter of the Atapuerca family, and I have already grandchildren within the Atapuerca family. So we are talking about a research project that has provided at this moment more than 100 PhDs related to these sites and research. So it's really becoming like a generation after generation of teaching and outreach and research. So I really want to highlight that everything I'm going to be telling today is thanks to this continuous support and teamwork in generations that make of this multidisciplinary project such a success. So the Atapuerca sites, are very rich. When we talk about the Atapuerca sites, we are not talking about only one locality. At the moment, we are excavating something like about 10 different localities that cover a very wide range of times, from the earliest presence in Europe until, I would say, present times, until Homo sapiens. But because, of course, the constraint of time, I'm going to be focusing mostly in the sites that are very famous because of the hominin remains they have provided. So we have Cima del Elefante with the earliest evidence of hominin fossils in Europe, which is, I would say, 1.2, but as we show you, perhaps a bit more than that. Then we have Gandolin at 36 level with Homo Ancestor, 860,000 years. And then we have the very famous sites of Cima de los Huesos dated to about 430,000 years. The Atapuerca sites are very rich. We are talking, in this case in particular, when we talk about these 3 sites, about a karst system. So the Atapuerca hill is not very high, it's not like apparently very high, but it's very rich inside. Okay, so we really have, I would say it's a very generous land that has been very generous in trapping all the evidence of all the hominins and everything that was going on for more than 1 million years. We are lucky that it's being trapped, and we work to really recover all this information. How some of the sites were discovered? Well, this is always a bit of fortune and luck, because at the end of the 19th century, a British mining company wants to build a train to really bring from a quarry some stone to the Basque country. So they really opened this trench. Yeah, and this trench, what is doing is really like cutting, opening the hills. So we can see all these caves and these karst systems, how they have been filled in with the sediment. So they're really trapping all the evidence of the hominins and the fauna, or whatever was going on in Europe at that time has been trapped. And this is what we really excavate, these infillings. So here, along the railway trench, you have the Cima del Elefante site at the beginning. This will be one of the first sites you see when you visit the Atapuerca sites. Then we have here the Gandolin. And then we have Cima de los Huesos, which is outside the railway trench. Yeah? So it's in a different karst system, but in a very close proximity. And these are mostly the 3 sites I will be talking about today. So the first and very famous infillings that we have in Atapuerca is the Gandolin site. So here you have an overview, and people here are really walking through where the train was passing, the railway trench. And this, what you're seeing here, is a view of the Gandolin infilling. What we have here, indeed, is a sequence of more than 10 meters high that is really like, we would say, an encyclopedia that has all the chapters from the earliest until the latest of the evolution. We are not missing any chapter. So we really have from the lowest levels, TD1, which would be dated to around 1 million years, to the top levels, TD10, dated to 300, 400,000 years. We really have this very long sequence that somehow has provided either hominin, archaeological or paleontological evidence. So here really in the same spot, you really have very continuous sequence that can tell you the story of the human hominin settlement in Europe at that time. So in the upper level, which was extremely rich level that took more than 20 years to finish, TD10, which is dated to 300, 400,000 years, we really have evidence of a very intense occupation. It's a campsite where we would say these early Neanderthal populations, the ones I will show you we have represented in Cima de los Huesos, were using. So we have thousands of lithic implements. We have thousands of faunal bones that allow to reconstruct the behavior, the use of space, all the environment at that time. So it's extremely rich. But back in the 90s, it was decided to do a survey pit. So this survey pit, it was like an archaeological test to check what was the potential of the site in lower levels. And in 1994, they reached to what now we know is the TD6 level. This TD6 level now is very securely dated. At that time was a big surprise because at least with paleomagnetism, we thought that this TD6 level was below the Matuyama-Brunes paleomagnetic event, meaning that was older than 780,000 years. And the big surprise is that at this level in TD6, it was found about 100 human remains where all the skeletal parts were represented. And this was a big surprise because the prevailing theory at that time was the short chronology hypothesis that was defending the fact that there were no humans in Europe earlier than 500,000 years. Now this level is securely dated by all means. We have ESR, luminescence, we have paleomagnetism, we have biochronology, we have cosmogenics, securely dated to around 860,000 years. So it was a big surprise because we were having hominins much earlier than expected. And because, well, as we know, when someone new comes to the family, we ask, who are you? Where do you come from? And that was the very interesting question. So first, we were having hominins earlier than expected. And we have to start investigating what these hominins, to which species they belong to. As an interesting data too, for you to know, we cannot get into detail. We are talking about 9 individuals approximately, and that they are accumulated there as a result of a cannibal event. Okay, so we have mostly immature individuals. We have children from 3, 6, 9, 10, 13, and a young adult about 13, 16, 7 years old. something like that. Well, they have I would say a beautiful, amazing catalog of what are the cut marks you would expect to have in a cannibal event. So you really have cuts in the points of attachment, insertion of muscles and tendons. They really have it in the base of the skull, in the head, in the epiphyses of the long bones for dismembering the bodies. So we have here a very clear early case of a type of cannibalism. And all these human remains were found together with about 100 also stone tool implements of mode 1, very primitive, and also 100 of faunar remains that were also having cut marks. So humans were also mixed with these animals and were exploited, but humans lived in the Sierra at that time. So big surprise, earlier than expected, and who are they? Well, the Atapuerca research team in 1997 published a new species that was named Homo antecessor. The reasoning behind naming this species is that it was providing a combination of features that was not identified before in any other hominin species that we knew in the tree. Was part of a daring publication. This was 1997 to really put someone new in the family and to propose no less that there was the best candidate to represent the last common ancestor of sapiens and Neanderthals, okay? Especially given its location in the westernmost part of Eurasia. What are the features that led to the naming of this species, Homo antecessor? A name which, by the way, comes from the Latin word to name the soldier in the Roman times, that they were giving antecessor to the soldier that was going ahead, the troops, to explore the way and then let the troop come behind. No? So that's our explorer, no? The one who really opened the gates of Europe to all the hominin clade. So the main features that in its combination, the Atapuerca research team thought was unique and deserved a new name or a new taxonomical identification were, on one hand, the expression of what we call primitive traits in the dentition, something that was not surprising given the age. So we were really having all the features that we usually found in specimens of this age. We have like very large teeth. We have a lot of superstructures like expression of a cingulum in the teeth, like a lot of crenulations with very complicated occlusal surfaces, asymmetric premolars, large molars. You can see this M3 is like huge. We have this sequence that is also particularly of size of the premolars, which is typical of early Homo specimens. But the big surprise is that these primitive teeth come together, what would we call a modern-like phase. Okay, and this modern-like phase, what we're seeing here quite in expressive way, refers to the orientation of the infraorbital plane. So the infraorbital plane that we just have in this area just below the orbits, which we usually in other early hominids, we have like projected, they are prognathic, no? These more like ape-like phases we are used to in these periods. It really has a coronal orientation. So it's parallel, it's even depressed, what we usually call this fossa canina, which is not clear, but somehow was the earliest evidence we have in the fossil record of a modern-like phase. Okay, so we could say that our phase indeed is a vintage design, you know, what was fashionable already 1 million years ago, yeah? So this combination is what led to the research team to name a new species because it was completely different to what we knew before. And we was proposed to represent the last common ancestor, or at least something very close to the divergence of sapiens and Neanderthals because of the expression of three features, three synapomorphies that appear new in Homo antecessor and are later inherited by sapiens and Neanderthals, which are namely the convex anterior, the convex temporal of the squama, vertical incisive canal, and the gracility of the mandible. So with these features, what we were suggesting that the Homo antecessor was either at the node or very close to the node of a split of sapiens and Neanderthals. So what we have in Atapuerca indeed is like a representation of that mother population that reached as far as Spain and is representing that core population. Where does this core population originate or come from? Well, this is something we're going to see. This was quite of a daring proposal again, because some people will say, what do you mean? You are meaning that sapiens and Neanderthals originated in Spain? Of course not. But what we're saying is that we have a representation in Spain. So the range of expansion of that mother population has reached this part of Europe, and we are able of finding an evidence of it. But probably, as we will see, may have evolved in Africa or maybe somewhere in Eurasia. This is something we will go. But we think this combination of features really put them here or very close to. And this is something that we have been defending with the morphology, and fortunately was also supported by the protein analysis. Yeah, we managed to get proteins from the enamel of Homo antecessor remains, which becomes the earliest evidence of this molecular type in a human, in a hominin species known so far. And the position, as you can see, is that Homo antecessor is really at the base of the clade that includes sapiens, Neanderthals, and the Denisovans, which at the time of discovery of antecessor were not known, okay? So somehow also the molecular evidence is supporting this idea that Homo antecessor is at the base of that clade, so it's really at the node or very close to the node of a split of sapiens and Neanderthals. And where does Homo antecessor come from? Okay, someone comes new, say who you are. Okay, you are a Homo antecessor. Where do you come from? At the time of discovery of Homo antecessor, it was suggested I could have an African origin. Why? Mostly because of the very primitive features in the teeth that were similar to what we knew in Africa. These early Homo populations, Homo habilis, mostly Homo ergaster. So this was the first suggestion. But I would say also this was a statement based a bit in what we used to think. No, we are a bit, I would say, in our evolutionary interpretations, because our species, Homo sapiens, comes from Africa. Sometimes we are a bit Africocentric in the interpretation of the origin of hominin species. So we thought that the natural thing is to come from Africa, okay? But in the last years, we have been working in a detailed study of all these fossils from Europe and its comparison with the Asian samples. We have reached the conclusion that perhaps Homo antecessor is not African, but indeed, based on an analysis of more than 5,000 teeth from all the localities and all continents, we reached the conclusion that Homo antecessor and the dentitions of the Pleistocene populations from Europe were morphologically closer to those found in Asia than to those found in Africa. We were able of distinguishing an African dental pattern and an Eurasian dental pattern. That Eurasian dental pattern was preserved from the late early Pleistocene until the appearance of Neanderthals. So with this, what we were suggesting is that Asian and European populations are more closely related among them than each of them are with the African populations, okay? So we are giving more weight to this within-Eurasia interaction than to try to explain each population we found outside Africa as a response or as a result of a wave outside Africa. I'm not going to go into detail with the morphological features that we found in the teeth, but just so you believe, not just have to believe me. As you can see, this is just an example of all these Eurasian dental pattern, for example, in the anterior dentition that is clustering like fossils like Chukutien and Sangiran with some Neanderthals like those from Ortiz and Monsenprom or the Gandolin and similar huesos fossils, like, for example, this very strong convexity of central incisors, the mass additive features of canines, and for example, in the posterior dentition, again, we have like higher percentages of mid-trigonid crest, anterior fovea pit-like one, a continuous transverse crest in premolars, and higher loss of cusp, more frequencies of non-Dryopithecus pattern in the teeth. So all these features are clustering together the European populations and the Asian populations and make them somehow different from the African ones. This, of course, for us was suggesting that there was a closer connection between the East and the West populations of Eurasia. This was a big change because we tend to explain all the hominin we have in Eurasia as a result of a dispersal out of Africa. But here what we are trying to emphasize is that there was probably an East-West connection, which we first established through the study of the dentition, but then more increasingly we see that we may find in other skeletal parts. As an example, I bring in you here fossils that we found in Asia of the similar chronologies, like could be Nanjing or could be Dali, although Dali is more recent. But in these cases, we have some specimens with a much more gracile facial skeleton, okay? So this would be another feature that even if these fossils do not present exactly the same type of face of Homo antecessor, it really has much more resemblance in the sense that we find earlier in Asia than in Africa all this early gracilization of the face that probably is at the base of the face we have at the moment. So this is to put an example of other skeletal parts that may be supporting this east-west connection or this more intense within Eurasia connection between populations than those with Africa. Based on these studies, based on more fossil evidence that have been found in the last years, what we suggest is that, well, we may have to stop thinking always of the settlement of Eurasia as a result of dispersals outside Africa, because after all, well, we also have evolution and natural selection and genetic drift in the huge Eurasia continent, okay? Why should be only evolution in Africa and why Eurasia should be only be a recipient of speciation events that occur in Africa? So we have to start looking at Eurasia also as a continent that can provide speciation events, and perhaps this source of the populations we found in Eurasia could be that once hominins are outside Africa, we may have dispersals to the east, to the west, which are ecologically easier, even because you are like adapting to the same zones and the same altitudes, and why not into Africa too? I mean, hominins are not tourists. I'm gonna say I'm not going back to Africa because I already have been there, okay? Hominins expand like fauna does as far there are not barriers, which could be biogeographical or ecological, that not allow them to expand. So what we think is that we have to start thinking no more about this directional, no, like excursions to going somewhere or expanding, but more like an expansion if you have enough demographic pressure, as far as you have the resources you need to live, or you don't have problems of competition or adaptation to those new environments. So this has been leading to a model we have been working these years, which is, well, we have called this a bit of like out of Asia and into Europe, trying to emphasize that the hominids we found in Europe are not necessarily of African origin, but may respond to an evolution of something that left Africa much earlier, okay? So if we have populations in Europe of 1 million years, we don't need to call for a dispersal in 1 million years, but maybe they are ready, the result of any other expansion of any other hominin that is outside Africa, at least 1.8 million years ago, as we have in the Manisi, okay? So in this sense, we work in what we call the sink and source model. This is a model that mostly insists that probably the settlement of Europe and probably of Asia is a sort of more discontinuous settlement. So what we have, and this is an hypothesis we are working in, is like maybe the source population could be established somewhere, and this is our proposal we are working in, okay? It is a model, it's a hypothesis we're working, that could be perhaps the Near East. Given that the Near East have, in comparison with some regions in Asia and with Europe, completely a much more stable environmental conditions that would allow for a resident population to stay and evolve. So that mother population, that source population, which has demographic pressure enough because it's been there resident, evolves and changes, and is going to be giving demographic expansions to the east and the west when conditions allow, okay? This means that these populations in the extremes may have some common features because somehow they're coming from the same mother. But of course, they will also develop their own features because they are going to be very separated in space. So this source population somehow would explain, in this case, the common features we see in the dentitions of European and Asian populations. But of course, we all know that the populations we have in Europe are different enough from all the populations we know in Asia. So they have their own variation when they evolve in isolation, but they have a common source that is going to be, yeah, like a pattern of more discontinuous settlement, not really just a population arrives and evolves in situ in Europe. Of course, this is more complicated to see, to try to see those differences in the morphology. It may not be that easy to discriminate, but this would explain, in our opinion, the high variability we see indeed, even within the populations in Europe. So with this model of possible repeated demographic expansions, that are interrupted. So each time we have a dispersal, probably each of those waves is bringing its own new variation because the mother keeps evolving. We could explain the settlement during the early Pleistocene. So this is a profile, a stratigraphic profile of the Gandolin site. As you may remember, Homo Ancestor was found here at the 36 level. So here we have stone tools and we have the humans, but we are also working at the lower levels, and we also have stone tools in TD5 and TD4. Okay, so that means that we have different episodes of hominin presence in Europe. And this is something we here brought you some examples of the stone tools we have, for example, in TD4, which is about 900,000 years. So we are now trying to establish like, okay, these populations we have in TD4, the same populations we have in TD6, is this just like what we're seeing is different dispersals, like short occupation, more fragmentary that are entering in Europe when they have the chance, but maybe they don't lead to a stable, continuous settlement of the continent. One way or another, what we are having is a quite strong evidence of hominin presence in Europe. It's not, let's say, as abundant or dense as we're going to have in the Middle Pleistocene, but somehow in different episodes, we really have representation of early Pleistocene hominins. The strongest evidence in our hope came with the Atapuerca Cima del Elefante site, okay? So this site, and this in picture you are seeing the T7, the T9 level, has provided what we knew until now, the earliest hominin fossil in Europe again. Okay, we found Homo Ancestor back in the 90s, 860,000 years, and then we were lucky in 2007 to find this mandible was the cover of nature, also a human phalanx associated to mode 1 stone tools. So we were like sort of pushing again the earliest date for hominin occupation in Europe. This was a big surprise. This site, we already have suspicious that there were humans around because we were having some cut marks and we were having some stone tools, but those were very basic, you know, so scientific community was not very convinced, which I understand. Big claims require big evidence. So in this case, we have the body, so there is no doubt that humans were there. And this is what we found first. So this is beautiful too. This is a lower second premolar, which you see has quite a strong root with hypercementosis. We have a beautiful toothpick here, which is quite impressive. Here you see the mark. And this is a tooth that, yeah, someone could say, when I saw it was very beautiful. I brought this picture because this is a picture I'm very fond of. So this was found in 2007. So it was like my first year after I defended my PhD. It was on teeth. Okay, so I remember I was excavating in Gandolin and they called me like, we found something funny at Elefante. It was Rosa calling and I went with Palmira, which is another colleague, which is very good in identifying fauna. And I just came and saw that tooth and I was so happy. And I was like, yeah, it's human and everything. So we were cheering up, celebrating. So then, of course, they start calling politicians to celebrate the meaning, the importance. And then I thought like, what about if I'm wrong? So it was like, you know, and now they are celebrating, they're calling everyone after all these years, and now I have to change career. Maybe I was too fast to say so happily that this is human, because indeed I don't really know how humans of this age are, you know, so it was a bit, I was like getting sick. So this is the moment Jose Maria was not around. I was like, where is Jose Maria? Because I really need to confirm. So this is the moment when Jose Maria came to the Railway Range. So I said, look, Jose Maria, yes, of course it is. So yeah, don't worry. So, okay, all these years invested looking in teeth, work for something. So I was very happy. So this is a very special moment because it's a golden opportunity to put in use all you have been doing for all these years. And he told me it was funny, and don't worry, because in a few days we're going to find the mandible where this tooth fits, which is what happened, you know. So this is the mandible. So what can we say about the species? When it was published, we just said that it was provisionally assigned to Homo Ancestor because of a feature that I'm going to explain you now, and because it seems sort of logical. They were so close by, just a few meters, but indeed it's not about a few meters. Indeed, they were separated by 300,000-400,000 years, indeed. So later in another study, we prefer to be more conservative and we say just Homo species. So it's a Homo species. We don't have evidence enough to really say to which species belong to this hominin. We know morphologically in the outside is primitive, has what you would expect to have a mandible that is 1.2 million years old, has this mentum osseo, has these incisuras submentales in the gastric spine. So nothing here is particularly informative in the sense that these are plesiomorphic features. But in the internal part is quite derived, has this very vertical alveolar planum, which is very unusual given this age. If you really compare this mandible to other coetaneous populations from Africa and Asia, you would really have this very pronounced, like a step, this alveolar planum here, like really pronounced. So this is something we also have in Homo antecessor. So we cannot tell this is Homo antecessor because it is not enough. We could tell, okay, it has something that similar age populations do not have in Asia, in Africa. So we could talk about an speciation event or something going on in Europe. No, it's like if these populations we have that early in Europe have lost their African identity somehow. No, it's really evolving to something more particular of Europe. So we do not really know exactly what they are. We think they could be related to Homo antecessor because of this vertical symphysis, but we still need more evidence to understand who were the earliest settlers of Europe. So in that sense, Atapuerca was generous again and again. And last summer, we were celebrating again. We're celebrating again, and I want to highlight again, this is always teamwork. It's this deja vu, like, wow, I cannot believe we're going through this again because it's beyond what we expected. And if the mandible in Cima del Elefante was found in the T9 level, 2 levels below that one, we found this partial phase. So currently we are working at any in a precise dating of this phase. But this is the first time we will be looking at the face of the earliest hominin in Europe, which is going to be very important because it's going to allow us to investigate at least a bit more who are they. We knew that Homo antecessor has a modern-like phase. What about this guy? Work is in progress, very interesting. But well, we are going to be able of at least adding some more information. We could think that these very early hominids, this Homo species, is the ancestor of Homo antecessor. This would be a more linear, continuous model for the settlement of populations arrive and evolve to Homo antecessor. Or we could be thinking of a more discontinuous pattern. So we have a source population, which could be outside Europe, could be the Near East, could be also Africa or East Africa. We are working the hypothesis that in the Near East, it may be more likely. And we have, again, like different dispersals at different moments. So we have one that really go in 1.2 million years. So it could be this mandible, maybe this belongs to the same population, maybe not, and maybe later we have another group, which is what we have represented in TD6 Homo antecessor. So we are trying to work in the geometry, okay, of this relationship, is what we are seeing. In general, we are more prone to think that what we're going to have is a continuous settlement, okay? So these are the models we are working in. We have a resident population outside Europe, because Europe is not an easy place to live in the early and also for a large part of the Middle Pleistocene until Neanderthals or early Neanderthals come. So I think what we are really having in Europe is the results of migrations of something that is somewhere, could be Africa or Southwestern Asia, gives the first Europeans, later close to the last common ancestor gives Homo antecessor, and later we're going to be seeing different dispersals. Some of them could be to Africa, some of them in Southwest Asia, of what we classically were calling Homo heidelbergensis, which is a name that nobody likes now anymore. So let's talk about early Neanderthals, okay? So until now, we were talking about this early stage. For what Atapuerca obviously has provided an amazing and very crucial information to try to explore what's going on. So we really want to compare these groups. Now we could add here another line. We don't know if the new phase of Cima del Elefante belongs to here, is a different wave, or just the same population. If it is Homo antecessor, it's a pre-antecessor world. This is what we're trying to work in. And now, thanks to the other sides of Atapuerca, we can also work what's going on here. And this comes with the Cima de los Huesos site. Cima de los Huesos site is, in terms of a space, a very small locality. We were talking about a space that is no more than 8 by 6 square meters, but only in this very small place, which is located deep in the karst system of Cueva Mayor, Cueva del Silo. We have recovered more than 6,000 hominin remains where all the skeletal parts are represented. We're talking about 29 individuals, which of course, as you know, this is an amazing representation of a population. No? When we were dealing with Cima del Elefante, we really have to imagine how all the hominins that inhabited Europe were just based on a mandible, a fragment. Here at least we have a picture of a population where we have adults, we have juveniles, we have children, we have males, we have females. So the amount of information we can recover about the biology, the evolution of Neanderthals, all ecological aspects is amazing, but also about the morphology. I did my PhD on the dentition. With the dentition, we say that as far as 430,000 years, we have everything you would expect a Neanderthal to have. So there's no doubt morphologically that these populations are very closely related to Neanderthals, meaning that Neanderthals have very deep roots in Europe. We also have all the skeletal parts. I would say here this amazing representation of the skulls. So we have up to 16 skulls, which of course give a lot of information about the population, about what we could call the Neanderthalization process, about the variability in the Middle Pleistocene. And again, the study of the skulls suggests that they are very closely related with Neanderthals, although somehow in some aspects are less derived than Neanderthals. They have smaller brains. We could have about 1,100, 1,200 cubic centimeters. So brains are smaller. They have some particular features in the skull. Part of a high skull could be a regional variation, but generally speaking, again, they have some Neanderthal traits. Some of them may not be as fully expressed as you find in a classic Neanderthal, but there is no doubt that these populations are related to Neanderthals. Of course, again, this is a magic place, and we were able of getting DNA, something that is very surprising given this age. Okay, so this is in the case of the nuclear DNA. So far, I think is the oldest human DNA recovered in a non-permafrost context. And I would say in this case, non-surprisingly, the analysis provide that they were very closely related to Neanderthals. Okay, so Neanderthals were the closest group to the Cima de los Huesos. This was not what we was found with the mitochondrial DNA, which it was, the mitochondrial DNA analysis came first, and we were all shocked. Because what it says is that it was more closely related to Denisovans than to Neanderthals, and there was a shock. There was a shock because they were so far distant, separated in geographic terms, but also in terms of time. Yeah, we were talking about a population that lived 400,000 years, and Denisovans at that time were around 40,000. So this was a big surprise. There are still, I would say, a lot of things to try to explain this. And we could discuss the different aspects. I'm not going to be talking in this department about Denisovans because you have the experts here. I would even there, but you know, Denisovans is a hominin group that is mostly based on the molecular data. And unfortunately, we do not have much fossils to really try to match with what we know in the fossil record. But it's a population that it is closely related to Neanderthals. Okay, so we say the closest clade to Neanderthals. But we don't know much about the morphology because mostly from Denisova, what we have is this, and I will show you more, you know, more teeth, this very non-informative finger bone in terms of morphology. And recently it was suggested that this mandible from the Tibet, the Xiahe mandible, was also representative of Denisovan. This is, I would say, a controversial assignment, so I believe it as a possibility, but personally I wouldn't take it as a strong claim of this being a Denisovan. So I think we have entered a stage that we are all a bit sort of hunting for the Denisovans in the fossil record. There's not much information we have. In terms of the morphology, my understanding is that these teeth are mainly characterized by being very large, extremely large. They are really in the upper range of variation of erectus and some early Homo, so they are very large. And my interpretation of their morphology is that they are somehow very Homo erectus-like. Homo erectus, understanding Homo erectus for what we have in Asia. It's very large, the shape, the very stout and robust roots. I would say they have, in a broad sense, an erectus-like morphology. What about the Chiaje mandible, the one that based on the protein analysis was suggested that could be close to the Denisovans? Well, I think this is an interesting fossil. It is very robust. I would say it's robust almost outside the levels of what we usually know in Homo erectus, with the exception probably of Hexian mandible, which is only very, very robust too. Some people suggest that may have a retromolar space. I do not think so. I think it's more just because it has a third molar genesia. So it looks like it has an extra space because we are missing one tooth. I do not identify here any Neanderthal feature. From my point, I don't see. It has a molar. The second molar has this bifurcation of the mesial root, so it's a 3-rooted molar. There was a paper published by Bailey and colleagues that they were suggesting that this morphology is similar to the 3-rooted molars that present-day populations have in Asia, which we reply because we do not agree. I don't think this morphology is what we usually call a 3-rooted molar. It's different in the type of the bifurcation of the root. So I do not think they are equivalent or homologous thing, but it is interesting that this morphology, which is quite rare, is also present in the Penhu mandible. The Penhu mandible is the first hominin from Taiwan, was literally fish in a fishing net. So the chronology is not very precise. We could say like could be 450,000 because of the other fauna and the analysis of the surface, likely 190,000 years. This is a very primitive mandible too, similarly as robust as we could see in Chiaje, fossils like Hexian, and they also have this very particular 3-rooted molar. So I don't know, this is Chiaje, this is Penhu. Okay, it could be a population that we don't know in which box we can put. So this is a bit of situation we are in. We know that there is a hominin population that we don't know how they look like, and we're trying to find them. But we can't forget that Asia is huge. And there are a lot of things that we are not able of like giving a name. So I think the first thing to do would be trying to sort out, put a bit of order in the variability of the hominin fossil record. So in the last years, we have been trying first to work in more, I would say, at least dentally precise, define what a Homo erectus in the sense of classic Homo erectus from Asia looks like. Okay, because I think Homo erectus has been used a bit as a blanket term where we put everything that is not a Neanderthal and there is not a sapiens that we found in Asia and covers a period of 2 million years, and we just put everything there and say, okay, but Homo erectus may have its own personality. So we cannot just put in the same box everything that is found in Asia for 2 million years, especially knowing with the Denisovan analysis that there may be something else. So we have been working trying to characterize what we consider classic Homo erectus. Classic Homo erectus as a group where so far would include Chukutian, Jijuan, and Hexian. And what we have been seeing in terms of external morphology, also thanks to the application of micro-CT, is that in these groups we can find some features that are very characteristic and that so far we have not found in any other hominin group. So I think somehow we are close to try to identify which fossils could really fall within what we know as classic Homo erectus. And when we find this case, you see, especially the dentin is very informative. We have these very extensive crenulations that we have named dendrite-like crenulations that, at least for me so far, I have not found in any other hominin outside these groups, okay? And this was controversial. I remember when I was trying to first publish with our colleagues in Burgos and in the IVPP in China, the Hexian fossils, reviewers were telling us that those were not human teeth because there was no any human that could have this type of crenulation in the dentin, and it should be a pongo. And I was like, okay, so we enter almost a philosophical question how to show that someone is human or is not human. So what we did is to be able of showing that the same type of features were present in a sample that was generally accepted as human, like Chukutian. Okay, so the same things we are seeing in Hexian are present in Chukutian, and nobody's really questioning these Chukutian teeth. So finally, we got them to publish. And what we see is that they have this very extensive crenulations that are even present in incisors, in the buccal surface. I've never seen anything like this until we saw these samples in Asia. Okay, so this very extreme crenulation of the dentin present even in central incisors, I think is very specific. I would even say exclusive of these classic Homo erectus populations. And the same happens with the morphology in the molar. So we have this shelf-like protostylid, is this structure you see in the face that constantly appears in most of these Asian populations. They have very large bucolingual dimensions of the mesial part of the crown. These have this pattern you see of the crenulations that are completely different from what we have in Europe, which is much more simple. So I would say we are able, at least dentally, to define what is Homo erectus, and by default, what is not. Okay, so in that sense, we say that maybe in Asia we have something else beyond Homo erectus. By characterizing what we call classic Homo erectus, we are able of creating another big group, another blanket term, if you want, we say the non-erectus middle Pleistocene. So first one thing, and now we go to the second problem. What do we have in this non-erectus middle Pleistocene group? So this is what we are working in now. Potentially there are many samples that you are aware probably in the recent findings in China that fit in this box, which are fossils we cannot clearly assign to Homo erectus, not to Neanderthals, not to Homo sapiens. And of course, potentially it could be Denisovans, because we know Denisovans are there, but we cannot really put them a face yet. Which samples would be representative of that? Well, if I were to choose one that I like as a putative Denisovan, would be Shuyayao. So Shuyayao is a sample of fossils that were found in North China, dated between 100 to 240,000 years. And this sample is very interesting because in the anterior teeth, they present traits that were typically found in Neanderthals. We can see here these massive additive features, this very strong labial convexity. But in the posterior teeth, we have Asian Homo erectus-like features, like this very large bucolingually enlarged mesial cusp of molars, these very stout open roots that do not narrow towards the tip. So again, it is a pity that we do not have anterior teeth from Denisova, because it would be quite nice to compare if they really have this morphology. But I would say here, well, you have a sort of mosaic between Homo erectus Asian features with sort of potentially Neanderthal or features that we thought that were typical or exclusive of Neanderthals, and now we see they are not. So this could be a nice candidate. Another interesting one would be the Suchang crania found in China too, which is dated to 100,000 fossils. And again, I would say what you have here is a primitive skull that in some aspects could have some features that we see in Neanderthals, but again, would say like a sort of Neanderthal with an Asian flavor. No, this mixture, this mosaic. And another example would be here in South China, the Maba skull, which has very strong resemblance to the populations we have, for example, in Cima de los Huesos. So we are entering a completely new world because we say, okay, Homo erectus, late Homo erectus, maybe we can have in China, we have Denisovans, but we don't know what they are. But we're increasingly seeing more and more Neanderthal traits, or what we thought that were Neanderthal traits, and what we thought that were exclusive of Neanderthals, and we are now start to see that they are not. So what does it mean to find Neanderthal traits in Asia? We could think that maybe those are the Denisovans, because as we saw, Denisovans are the closest clade to the Neanderthals based on the molecular data. So somehow we could expect that they are, I would say, like the Asian version of a Neanderthal. So have some things in common because they are very closely related to this sort of Neanderthal clade, but they have their own features because they have evolved non-separated. So we have defined Neanderthals in a very specific population. So we have very well characterized the classic Neanderthals of Europe, but maybe if you look at Neanderthals as a larger group, maybe they have a sister branch in Asia that becomes more like an atypical Neanderthal. So morphologically, we may find something like that. Maybe we find these Neanderthal traits in Asia because, as I was explaining you, we have a source population that is common, and that source population have those traits and are inherited by the European groups and by the Asian groups. Or perhaps, as we know, there's some introgression, there's interbreeding. So we do not really know. So somehow what we're insisting is that, okay, we may have a source population, which in a way is like the core that is providing the similarities within the populations that inhabit Eurasia. So we insist in this stronger interaction between Europe and Asia than they really have with Africa. But may not be everything. So we leave the door open for erectus, sapiens, Denisovans, perhaps Neanderthals. Do we have Neanderthals in Asia? Maybe. Maybe, why not? We know we have in Denisova, so why not? It may be an atypical Neanderthal because it's not the European one, which is so easy to recognize and we are used to recognize as a Neanderthal, so we don't know. But what about if we have something else? So currently we are working in a detailed analysis of the dentition of these fossils found in Hualongdong in China. They are dated to 300,000 years. They have a low cranial vault, about 1,150 cubic centimeters. And they are different to other Middle Pleistocene specimens, like the ones we have in Europe, in the facial and mandibular morphology. And I would highlight here the gracility of the face again, okay? Compared to Homo erectus, they don't have the classic Homo erectus face at all. You see that this area in infraorbital plane is quite vertical, even a bit depressed. So we see another example of these more gracile faces that we do not have in Africa and different from the prognatic faces we see in the Middle Pleistocene of Europe, like Cima de los Huesos. If we look at the teeth, this is just a preliminary assessment. We are working now on the detail from what we can see that has been published. These teeth do not show any specifically Neanderthal trait. And on the other hand, they are smaller and morphologically more simple than Homo erectus and the Denisova teeth. Okay, so maybe we need to consider the possibility that there may be another hominin lineage in Asia. Within this non-erectus Asian Middle Pleistocene group, we may have Denisovans, which should be interpreted as a closer clade to Neanderthals, and maybe something else. As you know, well, this is another example of another population that would fit in this non-erectus Middle Pleistocene group and that again does not have any Neanderthal trait. That with the exception of the upper central incisor, which is very primitive, the rest of the features are quite derived, and even the premolars fall within Homo sapiens. So again, 300,000 years, a population that has an unclear taxonomic status, that we don't know what they are, but they are quite modern-like in some aspects. And recently you are aware of the publication of this Homo longi in China, which unfortunately doesn't really have a very clear chronological context. This fossil is a very interesting fossil, which by Nierol was published as a monophyletic group closely related to Homo sapiens. Okay, so this is a different scenario. We were talking about Denisovans as the closest to Neanderthals, and now they are suggesting that this fossil may be closely related to Homo sapiens. They did a quite complex computational analysis. I get a bit lost in the insights of this analysis, but what we can see is they suggest that Harbin is very closely related to Hualongdong, which is the sample I just showed you before, the one with the more gracile face and the teeth that have no Neanderthal features. Dali, which is a classic that has been suggested as an archaic Homo sapiens in China. And Xiahe. This is a bit difficult to understand because Xiahe was suggested to be a Denisovan. If it is a Denisovan, you cannot be in two places at the same time. You cannot be closest to sapiens and closest to Neanderthals. Okay, so it's a bit difficult. Harbin does not have a mandible, but okay. But although I do not really understand the insights, how you put all these things together, this is interesting. Why? Because I do think it's interesting the idea of suggesting that we may have in Asia a group that is closely related to sapiens origin. And we should not discard that. As you know, in Africa, we have Jebel Irud. It's about 300,000 years and would be also within the clade of Homo sapiens. So it could be an early Homo sapiens or a pre-sapiens population. So if we think again of the expansion of populations, if we have this in Africa, why shouldn't we have something similar in Asia? If populations expand, maybe that pre-sapiens population could be also expanded and be found in Asia. Why not? So we have something in Africa, then we have 160, 190,000 years, so this is Homo sapiens. So I would leave open the possibility that apart from Denisovans, we may have another hominin lineage more closely related to Homo sapiens. So just to finish, within this idea, no, was the known, just not West Side story, I think the first hominin populations in Europe may have an Asian origin in its broad meaning. I'm not saying that they come from China, but probably they respond to an speciation event within Eurasia. That the variability we find in the populations points to discontinuity settlements that are conditioned by environmental conditions. So it's not really that a population arrives and evolves in situ in a stable, continuous manner. So probably we have a lot of fragmentation, local extinctions, probably interbreeding, which is quite difficult to grasp that in the variability of the fossil record. And I would say that apart from classic Asian Homo erectus, Asia may have been home for more than one hominin lineage. So we could have Denisovans, which is a classic Neanderthal sister clade, and perhaps also a representation of the ancestors of Homo sapiens. So luckily, there is still a lot of work to do and research ahead. So thank you very much.